Hello, everybody. Caracas had never been this alive at night. The city lights flickered like the pulse of a giant, yet something felt different in the air, a whisper of change spreading swiftly among a people worn out by years of crisis. Amid the chaos of the streets and the aroma of arepa drifting through narrow alleys, the evening call to prayer slipped through the noise, shaking the attention of anyone who had never heard it before. The voice came from Al-Ittihad Mosque, now one of the busiest spots in the capital. No one had imagined that a house of worship once visited only by a handful of Middle Eastern families would now be overflowing with Venezuelans from every background. Students, taxi drivers, street vendors, even former military personnel. They came not out of mere curiosity, but searching for something they could no longer find in the midst of turmoil: peace, direction, and hope. A local journalist described the scene as a new wave sweeping the nation without violence, without propaganda, but through the hearts of people. Meanwhile, international media began spotlighting Venezuela as an unexpected social phenomenon, a country that for centuries stood under the shadow of Latin Christianity, now witnessing the greatest spiritual shift in its modern history. In the markets, people spoke of it with curious tones. In the small Havana cafes, students traded stories about friends who suddenly began learning to read the Quran. In rural villages, mothers expressed surprise when their children came home with tales of Muslim community groups providing free food. "At first, I was just curious," said a Caracas resident, Lucia Mendoza, cradling her baby. "But when I saw how they helped each other without expecting anything in return, I felt something different, something that calmed my heart." The phenomenon grew so quickly that the public began calling it La Ola de la Paz, the wave of peace. And like a wave that cannot be stopped, the change crossed city lines, spreading to villages and then throughout the nation. What was once thought impossible was now reality. A spiritual awakening opening a new chapter for Venezuela, one that not only surprised the world, but proved that hope can rise from the most unexpected places. Not many Venezuelans know that the traces of Islam in their land were planted long before the first mosque ever stood. Those traces lie hidden in a history nearly forgotten, the history of Muslim African slaves forced to cross the ocean during the colonial era. In a small town called Coro, an elderly historian named Professor Marquez opened an ancient book whose cover had long begun to crumble. Inside, he pointed to handwritten records listing the names of slaves from the 18th century. Beside several names were symbols the Spanish colonizers never recognized, simple Arabic writings, resembling prayers or declarations of faith. "This is proof that they came carrying their beliefs," Professor Marquez said softly, "but history never gave them the chance to preserve them. Those enslaved people were never allowed to practice their religion. Their teachings were hidden, whispered at night, or disguised in the melodies of songs with meanings concealed. Generations passed and slowly the traces faded until they remained only as fragments of legend, barely believed by anyone. But this was where everything began to shift. As the wave of Venezuelan converts grew, the old stories of those Muslim slaves resurfaced. Young people started digging through archives, collecting tales from their elders, and discovering that some family traditions they once thought were simply ancient customs had far deeper origins. Some families recalled uttering a strange phrase before eating, now recognized as something resembling the basmalah. Others kept an old chest containing a crescent-shaped symbol, never knowing what it truly meant. In Maracaibo, an old woman named Doña Zulema even revealed that her great-grandmother once left a message, "One day, the lost path will be found again." Now those words felt like a prophecy coming to life. As more Venezuelans learned about Islam, the buried legacy of centuries past seemed to awaken. For many, this was not merely a conversion, it was a return to an identity their ancestors once held, but lost to the cruelty of history. The phenomenon stunned historians, sociologists, and religious scholars alike. They began to realize that the rise of Islam in Venezuela was not just a modern movement, it was a wave from the past finally rising to the surface. And when the past and present converge, a new movement is born, one increasingly impossible to stop. The change had finally become tangible across Venezuela. In every corner of the major cities, Caracas, Valencia, Maracaibo, the only gloomy atmosphere began to shift with a new energy. Mosques were no longer silent, foreign buildings. On Fridays, streets surrounding the mosques clogged with traffic due to the overwhelming number of worshippers. Al-Ittihad Mosque, which once accommodated only hundreds, now welcomed thousands each week. Mosque administrators even had to set up additional tents in the outer courtyard. People who had never encountered Islam before now sat cross-legged, listening intently to lessons on patience, honesty, and social justice, values they felt had been lost amid the economic crisis. Muslim community social programs became the main magnet for this transformation. Free community kitchens operating daily were never empty. In city centers, Muslim volunteers distributed warm meals to the homeless, while donation-based clinics provided free medical care to families who could no longer afford hospital bills. The movement brought new color to everyday life. Many residents described it as a fresh breath amidst life's pressures. Islam appeared not as theory, but as action, visible, tangible, and deeply felt. Behind the growth figures lay thousands of human stories, full of pain, hope, and search for meaning. Alejandro Rivas, a former medical student who had fallen into despair after his family went bankrupt, said he first heard the call to prayer by chance while seeking food assistance. He felt the sound captured his heart in a way that was hard to explain. After attending a single Islamic study session, he said, "I felt like I had come home to a place I had never visited before." Maria Fernanda, a social activist who had spent years helping crisis victims, was moved to see how the Muslim community worked with care and organization. She witnessed volunteers helping others without asking about religion or background. That selfless attitude shook her understanding of what humanity truly meant. Similar stories emerged from across the country. An elderly bus driver who had lost his family found peace while learning the ritual of wudu. A dropout student decided to return to school inspired by the disciplined and orderly community. Even some youth who had fallen into crime sought a new path to guide them out of their dark past. Though their stories were different, their goal was the same: to find peace amid life's chaos. As the wave grew, international attention turned to Venezuela. The world was stunned to see a country once defined by crisis become a hub of spiritual and social discussion. Foreign media sent journalists to observe the phenomenon of the new Venezuela, where Muslim solidarity spread like a warming fire, not one that consumed. Middle Eastern countries reached out. Scholarships for Venezuelan youth, cultural centers, and humanitarian training became new bridges. Some diplomats even called Venezuela a new light of Islam in the Western Hemisphere. At the national level, tangible social change became visible. Muslim volunteers became one of the largest humanitarian forces in the country. Many citizens felt that Venezuela now had a new direction, even if not everyone agreed with the movement. But one thing was undeniable: the rise of Islam in Venezuela had changed the face of the nation. From a small, nearly invisible community, a large movement was born, offering hope, discipline, and unity. And when the world asked how such rapid change could happen, the Venezuelan people simply answered, "We found peace, and that peace spreads."